Well, so you actually sent this to me. This just came out that the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, Wang Wenbin, made the claim the U.S. plans to deploy genetically engineered weapons against European Aryans and other races. So, how real do you think that claim is?
Ludicrous. It's one of the most wild claims that I've seen the Chinese Communist Party make of late. It's laughable. Drew Pavlo, who is an Australian activist on China, just replied with a crack pipe. I mean,
Sounds like Drew. We've had him on the show a few times.
Yeah.
But so why are they making that kind of a claim, like the specific, like ethnic cleansing thing?
Well, the timing is interesting because it's right when the G7 meeting is opening up, and the G7 meeting will be looking very closely at coordinating economic policies on Russia and China, including against economic coercion, I think most importantly, by Beijing. So it may be an attempt to distract from that meeting, but it's a huge claim, and there are concerns in the United States that China could be doing the same thing. So it may be one of those, accuse the other guy before they accuse you things in order to confuse people.
Well, I mean, it's certainly working. I didn't lead off with the question about the G7. I went straight to this.
Yep, exactly.
But so you mentioned like this is something China might be doing. And I know you have made the claim that China is committing genocide on Americans. So what is China doing? What do you think? Why do you say that?
Well, the fentanyl crisis, I think, is a serious enough 70,000 American deaths every year from fentanyl overdose and there's a total lack of cooperation on the part of the Chinese Communist Party with U.S. officials. In fact, China linked our Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan with, they were so angry about that they canceled cooperation on counter narcotics, which is really using American deaths as leverage on a political issue, which is just unconscionable. But it also shows that there's an intentionality, I think, to what they're doing that's a critical element in terms of the international legal definition of genocide, which you can find in the UN Genocide Convention.
Well, so when you say that, China often accuses people of doing what it is doing, is this what they were talking about or trying to cover up when they made the claims about the U.S. deploying genetic weapons?
Could be. I think. There's very few people are claiming that Beijing is attempting a genocide against the United States or is engaged in a It's not really. It's a genocidal activity by the UN definition. It's not the Holocaust. It's not obviously not at that level. None of China's genocides. I would argue there's clearly a genocide against the Uyghurs. The U.S. recognizes that. Other countries have recognized that. But there's also the genocide, I think, against the Falun Gong. And then now I think this actually reaches that level of genocide by the UN definition. So
you're saying that the Chinese drug war and sending fentanyl to the United States is equivalent to a genocide?
Well, it's killing a lot of Americans. They clearly intend to do it because they canceled counter narcotics cooperation with us. So that's an intentional act that rises to that shows state intentionality, which is part of the definition, the UN definition. I think we should start considering that, thinking about that, talking about whether this reaches that level of genocide. But our U.S. politicians are just totally not doing what's necessary. There are a couple of senators recently sent a very polite letter to officials in China asking for cooperation on counter narcotics. And, that should have been happening years ago because the CCP is so knowledgeable. Their surveillance systems are so sophisticated that they obviously know where and when the fentanyl precursors are made, that they then ship to Mexico, Canada, and other places. They could shut down that illegal precursor trade at any time. The detractors claim that, well, the precursors are used for other things as well, but there are some precursors that are only used for fentanyl, and a lot of this stuff is unlabeled, mislabeled when it's used for illegal purposes. They mix this stuff up in garages in Mexico, and they get it wrong, and people are dying. I mean, it's a ridiculous number of Americans who are dying from this, and who knows how many other people around the world are dying. It's really a global crisis and something that the world needs to take seriously. Unfortunately, the people who are dying are at the bottom of our societies and don't have much of a political voice. So they're not given much attention by our politicians, I would argue.
So to get back to the intentionality of this, it's one thing for the Chinese Communist Party to refuse to cooperate on drug enforcement, or to say they don't have the ability to crack down locally. I mean, of course they do, but that's a little different than intentionality when it comes to really calling it a genocide. So what are some things that, or if there are any things that you think the Chinese Communist Party is doing that shows that they are intentionally trying to get these drugs to the U.S. to kill Americans? Well,
I believe that canceling counter-narcotics cooperation with the U.S. shows intention. That cancellation of cooperation is an intentional act. And it's very clearly related to Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. They did it in retaliation to Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. So to me, that proves intentionality. You can disagree. I suppose some lawyers might disagree, but I think other lawyers, when they look at that, could claim that is an element of intentionality that shows they know that 70,000 Americans are dying every year from this. They know that this stuff is lethal. They know that it's being sent to Mexico, Canada, places where it's being mixed improperly. Americans are taking it. I mean, drugs in the U.S. are getting more and more lethal. They're getting more and more powerful. There's a recent study that links even marijuana use, because it's so intense, to mental illness. So it's a very, very serious issue, and we're simply not taking it seriously enough. I've also argued that we need a new war on drugs in the United States. That many people are dying. We just can't allow ourselves to be destroyed as a nation through this overdose problem, these opioids, without taking action against the countries that are complicit.
Well, I know the Mexican president recently said he has proof that China is smuggling fentanyl and fentanyl precursors to Mexican drug cartels. It is amazing to see just how much the Chinese Communist Party is actively involved in international crime, whether it's supplying drug precursors or providing the financial services necessary for Mexican cartels to function.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, some of the, I think, Republican members of the House of Representatives are actually proposing military strikes on the cartels in Mexico. I mean, after 9/11 and Pearl Harbor killed, about 3,000 people each, we had a serious military strikes against those people who were killing Americans. Now we have 70,000 Americans dying, and we're doing nothing. So I think we really need to take much more serious action. And that should also include heavy economic sanctions on China and on Mexico until they cooperate. Because even Mexico is not fully cooperative. They're not doing what's necessary to shut down the cartels. There's intense corruption at every level of government in Mexico. And part of that corruption is from the cartels. So we need to take more action, be more assertive globally if we want to protect Americans.
Now, you'd mentioned that one of the reasons this isn't getting a lot of attention is because most of the people who are dying of fentanyl overdoses in the U.S. Are at the kind of margins of society. And, while on one hand, perhaps all lives are equal spiritually, from a political perspective, as you point out, like this is a group that does not have political power. That may be one reason why it's not getting enough attention. Do you think that there are other? So why would the Communist Party go after a group that doesn't have any kind of political power, people who are at the margins? Why not put their efforts into something that might have more of a political impact?
Well, let me revise what I said slightly. I mean, the fentanyl crisis does, in fact, kill people at every level of our society. But I believe that the people who are most affected are often minority groups, people who are buying the cheapest drugs on the street. Basically, the cheaper the drug, the more likely it is to be mixed with fentanyl. Marijuana is less likely to be mixed with fentanyl because marijuana is actually cheaper than fentanyl is to produce. But the other drugs that are out there, heroin, cocaine, et cetera, prescription medication abuse, all of these things are much more expensive to produce than fentanyl is. So they mix fentanyl in. So these are cheap drugs that are targeting poor populations in the United States. I don't think the CCP is necessarily on purpose targeting the poor in America, but I think that in actuality and in effect, the poor are bearing the brunt of these drugs.